Hey, Happy New Year, everybody. In this video, we're going to cover the 3 ideas that if you pursue, it will guarantee you'll have a great year in 2025, even if things don't go according to plan. When I was growing up, one of my favorite things to do was to ride a bike around the neighborhood. My brothers, though, being the little menaces that they are, would often put a stick in my wheel and sit back and enjoy the view as I would fall down. I'm pretty sure you've seen that meme of the person riding a bike and then someone puts a stick in the wheel and they fall over, or the one where someone puts a stick in their own bike, falls over, gets up, and then starts blaming somebody else for it. I really think starting the new year is like a fresh bike ride. We have goals, we have resolutions. The reality is, though, at some point along the road, someone will stick a stick into our wheel, or we'll do it ourselves. And so the question is not whether or not we will fall, but what we do afterwards. So, how do we have a good 2025 when we know things will not go according to plan? 2,000 years ago, St. Paul wrote to a small church in the Roman colony of Philippi. And he wrote because things weren't going according to plan. See, they had like 2 sets of sticks being put into their wheels. One, there was gossip and internal fighting among the members. And second, the outside world, which paid allegiance to the cult of Roman Caesar, was pressuring the church to abandon their worship of Jesus as Lord. So the Apostle Paul writes them this advice, which I actually think is super applicable for us today. It's recorded in Philippians chapter 4, verses 4 through 7. He says, "Rejoice in the Lord, always. Again, I will say, rejoice." Then he goes on to say, "Let your gentleness be known, and don't worry about anything, but in everything with prayer and supplication, with thanksgiving, let your requests be known to God." And then he follows up and says, if you do this, the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. So step number 1 is to rejoice. That's the first tip. But to me, honestly, it sounds a little bit tone deaf. How can you say rejoice when I have so many things working against me and against my goals? For us today especially, there seems to be so many sticks in the wheel, if you will, on the horizon. We've got inflation, lower wages, higher prices. Shoot, the world seems to be on edge of World War III. There are drones flying over New Jersey, and there was a plane crash in Asia just last week. The problem is, I think we think of joy or happiness as only possible when everything is going well. But this rejoice in the original translation has this other meaning. It means, or the sense that the happiness a person feels when they welcome a loved one into their home. You know that feeling when you have a bad day and a good friend calls or comes over and just their presence lifts the mood? I think that's what Paul is talking about here, that even if things aren't going well, Jesus is still always present. I saw this great short on social media. There's a man standing in a field, and there is a counter called the stress level, and it's sitting there at 100. Then his spouse comes into the frame, and as soon as they make eye contact, the counter starts to go down 100, 90, 80. And as she gets closer and goes in for a hug, the counter starts to go down even faster, 70, 60, 50. He puts his arm around her, and with this embrace, they walk off the screen as the counter hits 0. And that's what I think rejoice means. It's regardless of circumstances, Jesus is always present and ready to help when we fall off the bike. He helps us brush ourselves off and get back to it. So that's the first idea, to have a great year guaranteed. Remember, regardless of the circumstances, bad or good, God will never leave you alone. Idea number 2, have a great year this year by being gentle to everyone. He follows up St. Paul and he says, being gentle is a prerequisite for people of faith. And it doesn't mean being weak, or if you're in a toxic relationship, to allow that to continue in a way that harms you. Gentleness here means not insisting on every right that is due to you, and also kind of lowering expectations of how others will treat you. I'm not saying lower your expectations of yourself or lower your goals. Let's say you run a small business and you're responsible for setting culture on your team. No, you have to have high expectations there. What I'm saying is when you are out and about, don't respond to negativity with negativity because the world is broken. And if we did that, we would spend all of our energy on negativity. Instead, respond with gentleness, move on, and save your energy for what matters most. Aristotle described gentleness as the one who by choice is content to receive a smaller share, although he has the law on his side. And I think we can do this because God himself did not give us what we deserved, but he gave us grace when we deserved wrath. The best thing in my marriage, for example, is when my wife shows me grace when I don't deserve it. And that happens all the time. It causes me to actually let my guard down, to stop fighting against her sometimes and start fighting for us. So gentleness is this powerful weapon when things aren't going to plan, to lower the temperature and to really put our energy where it really matters most. And secret number 3 to have a successful year is to replace anxiety with prayer and thanksgiving. Now, anxiety is a real issue today. And what I really like about Paul is he doesn't just say, oh, just stop it. Don't be anxious. No, he sort of suggests to replace anxiety with something else. And that's because he knows it's a habit. He's actually in line with modern science and psychology, which tells us that bad habits don't just stop, they need to be replaced with good habits. James Clear, who wrote the best-selling book Atomic Habits, in one of his blogs, talks about the reason habits are wholeheartedly difficult to stop. And he says the reason is because they provide short-term benefit. For example, if you drink, you get temporary relief from stress, but in the long run, it can cause damage. In the same way, anxiety, at least in my experience, when I overthink about a problem, I start coming up with solutions, like 20 of them, for how I can solve it. And in that moment, I have a sense of control, which makes me feel better. The problem is when those solutions don't work, I feel even worse. So make a plan. Every time you feel anxiety creeping in, Paul recommends that you stop and you pray. Replace with anxiety with prayer. So what is prayer? Well, simply, it's just a conversation with God. And Paul here is saying that prayer needs to be a supplication and it needs to have thanksgiving. Supplication just means be specific, not religious. There's no need to be polished or think you have to say a beautiful poem to heaven. Tell God exactly how you feel and exactly what you want. In fact, most of the Psalms in the Old Testament are raw and they are a cry of the heart. And then add thanksgiving, meaning God, as I'm asking for these things, I'm also mindful that you have answered prayers in the past, you've shown up before, and I know you can do it again. I think this really provides balance and help us count our blessing, which actually then results in peace that is like a shield that protects our well-being, our mental, and also our emotional health. Years ago, when I decided to change careers and work for a church, I remember we sat down with my wife and we were a few $1,000s short on our annual budget because my salary was a little bit lower. And I remember just bringing that to God very specifically and saying, Lord, this is the amount that we need to make up this hole. A couple of weeks later, I get this call from a contractor who said, hey, I heard you're starting a church and my wife and I have been praying and God put it on our hearts to send you some money every month. And what's fascinating is when he named the amount that he wanted to give us, it was just a little higher than what we needed to close the budget deficit. In a way, that was just God helping us get back on the bike and keep going. So, what about you? How has God been faithful to you? How has he helped you over the years keep going? Let me know in the comments below. And I hope this video was helpful for you. If it was, please like it and subscribe to the channel, and we'll see you in the next one. Happy New Year.